We're ready to now kick off our main part of this session. And there's no better person to introduce our speaker than Deanna Daly. Deanna Daly, as you know, is our alum, but also is a board member. And she actually has a special connection to our speaker.
Thank you so much, Christy. Yeah, I am so pleased. I mean, I kind of like introducing interesting people all the time, but I'm so pleased to introduce Thomas because Thomas and I were in the same SEA class many, many, many years ago. And he has gone on to grow and run a very successful baking company. I also, I hadn't connected with him in a long time. And so, looking over his history was very interesting because, he grew up in operations and supply chain, which sings to me because that's my jam. His educational background, when I knew him, it was UC Davis. And then after that, it was MIT and Johns Hopkins University, and of course the SEA. So to not steal too much of his thunder, hopefully he'll give you some more details on what he's been doing over the past 20 years. Please welcome Thomas Gentle. Welcome, Thomas.
Yes, thank you so much. It's good to see you too.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
So we picked up a couple other folks too. So it was funny. I ended up spending a while before this morning of writing up a bio, and I thought I would spend 5 minutes on it and send a few notes, and it makes you think a little bit more. So I'll pull up what I sent over on some of it. But yeah, so I was we were in the 21 class together. So I went to Davis. I was animal scientist by training, which I haven't used so much. But the plan we had done in the academy, we actually pursued after that. So one of the other folks I was in with, Dave Stone, who was quite a character as well, I wish could have today too. We did it for several months after, and then we both had were moonlighting selling yellow pages while we were trying to do this. So as you can imagine, probably good we didn't pursue that as a long-term career. Half of you have seen yellow pages before. But so we pursued it actually for a while. It was a measuring tool. We were able to get trademark it, get provisional patents on it, but fairly quickly still came to the conclusion that we couldn't really fund it. We couldn't really truly protect it. And we weren't. We didn't have the level of discipline. I joked in the thing. I think we were as likely to go out and float down the American River or end up in San Francisco when we should have been working. So, and I came to a conclusion we should pursue other things. So he went off, as just a quick aside, with his brother had started this little mortgage business, and I had zero interest in that. And that became Pacific Union Financial, which they sold off for hundreds of millions of dollars not so long ago. So you guys might know who they are. So I might have taken the wrong path, but I'm happy with the path I took. So I actually went back and followed my degree. So went to work in pet food. So in going through Davis, I wanted to be a vet, but I was very tired of being poor, and so I couldn't do vet jobs because there's just too many people who work for free there. So I started working in factories, like animal food factories. So I'd drive down to Stockton, to French Camp, like early in the morning, and work at a factory. They called it a plant manager internship, which meant unloading rail cars in the sun. So good branding on their part. But I think it was $11 an hour, which was like $5 an hour more than I'd ever made in my life. So it was great money. But did that, and actually I like the manufacturing side. So once we kind of wound down the business, I went to work for Nestle and hired into quality. And so they moved me back to a small town in Nebraska where I was from. Got there the first day, and they said, "What would you think about working in the warehouse?" So I didn't last one day using my degree after going there, and was informed that I would be on third shift as the new warehouse clerk in their distribution center there. So did that, and learned SAP, some of those things. And about a year later, my boss had left and went to a big, another big food company. ConAgra, and so it invited me to follow along. So ended up, I'll do just very briefly through this, but ended up as a line engineer there, and then so that moved me from Nebraska to Missouri, and then a production manager in Texas making canned beans. So another sexy thing, you know, you grow up thinking about what you want to do, and that was it. So spent some time in Texas, and then ran a peanut butter plant in Georgia for 2 years, and then a largest tomato plant in the world in outside of Modesto, California, there. And then got moved kind of kicking and screaming to a corporate role, but it ended up just a really good thing for me. I was getting fairly deep at that point, but was just really, really narrow. You know, I knew the manufacturing side, you know, not even really a lot of the logistics side. But ended up in a corporate role for 3 years, and we were doing a couple different things. So half of it was procurement. So it was supporting cost savings for procurement, which was great because I just got to get exposure to all these different businesses and contract manufacturers and technologies and things. And then the other half of it, they brought in these, you know, outside, you know, consultants, McKinsey and another group, and was just buried with these folks for the better part of 3 years, going through every single brand in the company and looking at the assortment. So all the different products they offered. So if I picked on one, like Chef Boyardee, so they had these old kind of traditional brands. So they had 76 different products for Chef Boyardee. And of course, all of them were, you know, deemed critical, which wasn't true, and the Pareto rule applied. So we had a handful of them that were giant, and all the rest were really tiny. And so we actually spent years going at brand by brand, product by product, kind of customer by customer, and just really understanding the reason for being. And it was great. I learned a ton. And one of my probably bigger epiphanies from that is we had just people all over the company working really hard, smart people on the wrong stuff, because they didn't understand the whole business. And that's one of the things I'd tie back to the SCA side, where you can get in a functional silo, or you can be looking at a certain set of metrics and make just horrible decisions because you don't understand the rest. So in that case, one of the examples where we were trying to consolidate factories. So they closed multiple factories. We're building a big mega factory to move all these things in. Well, through that process, we realized half of the products they were moving in, and then the associated equipment and cost and startup and all these things were for products they didn't make any money on and actually really had no consumer benefit. So for example, we would do analysis on shelf and look at, if this product wasn't there, where would the sales go? You know, so if you think of just going in and shopping for a box of cereal or something, if one isn't there that you wanted, you might just buy the larger size of the same flavor, for example. So at what level do you go to another brand versus just trading? And what we found in a lot of them for that product, for example, 70% of the people just bought one of our other products. So we spent a tremendous amount of money to move stuff that had no value. So the company ended up building a $100 million box that we never moved a single thing in, with all kinds of people's jobs changing and things like that, because we hadn't done the work to understand our product and consumer, you know, first. And so that got me a bit of a bug to go back to school. So that's why I went back and got a finance degree, but also just wanted more customer exposure, because I didn't have the level of appreciation being on the manufacturing side of how different the retail strategy was, you know, and the consumer need and those kind of choices. So had a chance to spend the last 2 years I was with them on the East Coast in a forward sales office. And so owned kind of backdoor warehouse to shelf. So we got a lot more exposure to the retail side there. And then a couple of the things that started to shape me to want to move on and you know, do something at least closer to entrepreneurial were I think twofold. So one was just bad behavior in a big company. And then the other was just seeing how much work I was doing without really getting much reward from it. So in the first one, the head of sales for the East Coast that I worked under had you know, nominated one of his folks who ran the Southeast to this big company team that was going to look at the future of sales and how it was organized across the company. So it was, you know, great learning, great exposure for that person. That person figured out how to get his boss fired in the entire East Coast moved down to the place where he already lived that really wasn't by any strategic customers. and so they wanted me to move down to that location as well. So that was a very quick observation, and who do you not want to work for? Who should maybe you not trust? And some of just behavior in those organizations. So I was fairly blown away from that. So I knew that I was not going to make that move. And then the other thing was we had started a new initiative on it was called cost to serve, and that was really looking at all the costs from, again, back of our warehouse to shelf at retail and all the different waste. You can imagine in companies that big, it's tens of millions of dollars in fines and fees and returns and all these different things that kind of come into play of just getting to shelf. And so we kicked off the program, and we had a target of $4 million that we're all worried about being able to hit. And we got through the first year and saved $18 million. So it was tremendous amount of waste because it just hadn't been looked at, right? We're in, the factories, we might have been chasing $10,000 here, $10,000 there. It just hadn't been a point of focus, and the metrics were really poor. Sometimes incentives were really wrong to do the right thing for the company because they're very siloed in terms of what sales may have been chasing versus other teams. And so I think my bonus was $6,000 that year for that. So we saved $14 million more than what our plan was and had a $6,000 bonus. So that was another searing data point for all of us to kind of think about in those kind of businesses of there just wasn't that much of a difference to me other than the satisfaction of good work, which is great, but to my future and my family for having a huge impact. So I knew I just wanted to get closer to it. And so that caused me to leave to go to Nature Made Vitamins. But I'm gonna just pause for a minute and then kind of try to wrap up the background side. Any questions you guys have so far? I don't want this to be a one-way conversation.
I'm just absorbing what you're saying. It's amazing. Like it's so a little like it's just hearing your transition. Like it doesn't matter how you start or how you finish. I'm just loving your journey that you're just kind of like talking through. It's so not exactly a question other than like I'm curious what kind of like process improvements did you put in? Like what were your best practices? That sounds like, for me, I'm a supply chain geek. I'm like a supply chain. So I kind of live and breathe that. But that's all like another separate conversation. Really enjoying your story.
Oh, sure. And if I can be helpful outside of this, just let me know too. I'd be happy to connect with anyone, but very, very different depending on the location and environment. So we ended
Which Yellow Page company did you work with?
It was Valley Yellow Pages.
I used to work there.
Really?
Back in from 2003 to 2007.
Oh, that's great.
In the Sacramento office.
Me too.
Look, hold up. I got this right here. Hold on, you're gonna have to see this.
I can't see it. I don't see
45% gain.
Well, I didn't have any 45% gain because, as I said, we're spending most of our time floating down the American River, but it was enough to support a college kid.
I just love that you have so many like kind of odd end jobs that you across. I guess.
Yeah, we were pretty scrappy growing up. We did a little bit of everything from worked in a restaurant to I grew up in agricultural background, so we got all put to work young. So I did everything from clearing fields and cutting hay to making cookies at my aunt's store to working on the weekends for a pest control company, like drilling holes for termites and stuff. So there's not very much I'm above, to be clear. So but in all, it's working with people. And so I think that's one of the things I always like, the factory side of just being out there working with folks. But so to move on from the ConAgra days, I went to Nature Made Vitamins. So you guys are probably familiar with them. So the largest retail brand in the US. And so went there. They're in LA. They had a couple different plants in like sleepy brand in a lot of ways. So I'd say like some companies, you can get kind of fat and happy. So they were mature. I mean, they had been around since in the 80s. but margin covers a lot of sins, you know, and just industry growth covers a lot of sins. So they'd really done well kind of riding that, but for their age and for the money they had, they just weren't very scrappy. So it was, for example, even it was really, really hard to get any money at ConAgra for an investment. It was really easy at Nature Made, but easy enough that people didn't spend wisely. You know, they really didn't think about that enough. So I digress a bit. But so I started over continuous improvement for the sites, and then ended up over the 6 years there doing that in industrial engineering. And then we ended up building a new factory and then quickly expanding that as gummy vitamins took off. So built a new site in Alabama, and then the last few years was leading quality for them. And so they are owned by a Japanese pharmaceutical company. So like the two most levels of strict, you know, and stringent you could be between, you know, Japanese ownership and pharma. But one of the points of difference for them that I think they really embraced it, in some, you know, some viewpoints it was wasteful, and others I think it was genius. But you know, they had #1 pharmacist recommendation, and they really anchored in on that was going to be their point of difference. So we spent probably 300 to 400% as much on quality as our peers in that space. So a tremendous amount. So where the standards were somewhere between, I would say, food and pharma in some areas, and some were lighter than food, they just poured a ton. So we spent the last 2 years going to more of a pharma standard on vitamins. But I think the insight there was, you know, that whole business is around trust, right? You don't take a fish oil or a vitamin C or a vitamin D or something like that knowing exactly what it does after, right? It's not a Tylenol. It's really built on what do you believe it does, because you'll find 50 pieces of research that all conflict, right? And so people choose which one they like, you know, and follow that. But for them, they were going to be clean. They were going to be pure. It was going to have exactly what they said in it. It was going to have in it, and they were going to have those controls around it. And they put their money behind it. So it was a good company to work for. I think it was a good culture to work for. And if I was to give a plug, I would say, if you're going to go out and buy any kind of main vitamin types, their quality is better than almost anything you'd find out there. So good company. But I was also just getting to the place where I liked it a lot there. I liked the people there. I liked the culture there. And I liked the level of influence you could have on a smaller business. They were about $1 billion company. We're not a, you know, $20+ billion company like a ConAgra. But I wanted more skin in the game. I really loved that level of influence. I wanted to be able to have more, and I wanted to be able to just build and create more. And so I had started looking at private equity opportunities. And just real quickly, because I'm sure people have different levels of familiarity. You obviously have big public companies, right? You have smaller private companies, and then a lot of the way in between as folks would grow along that spectrum, one way or another, they have to get money, right? So you guys have probably, I'm sure, had funding topics already as part of this, but you might have friends and family money, you might have angel money, you might have private equity or kind of venture capital money. But I think there's a space in between in a lot of these where you'll get a company that is grown to a certain level or a certain level of success that they can't get beyond it because of, you know, the talent they have, the resources they have, or just how much it costs to get into some of these bigger markets. And so, but it doesn't mean it's always smart money. It doesn't mean the company's always good or has that much potential, or the, you know, people running it are strong. And so I started to look at those things, but ended up talking to several and just not pursuing several. In part for me, it was just risk tolerance. I had two little kids, and my wife didn't work, and there's only so much risk, you know, that I was willing to be able to take. I wanted to make something that was a sure enough bet, but also it would be lucrative if we're successful. The other thing I was wary of, so if folks look at that space, is, you know, the private equity side is not all created equal. You know, there are some that are brand builders. There's some that are, you know, slash and burn. They have really different approaches and strategies. So if you guys look at that in that space, you know, I would say for any job, I would look first look at industry, then look at company, and then look at role, right? And position within that. And in these, I'd just overlay, think about who the partners are. But if you have a wonderful job title in a nice seeming company, but they make VHS tapes, right? You're not going to win, right? So you got to make sure that you're in a space that can have some success. But what I've also seen in the private equity space is, I'm sure you guys see all the stories out there, is you'll get some of these areas that are pretty hot. You'll see all kinds of companies that'll launch, but most don't make it. So even if it's a hot industry, it doesn't mean, I've got 5 of them reach out around vertical farming companies in some of these, and some are just spending like drunken sailors. You can see the leadership team doesn't know very much about that space. Most aren't going to make it. So if you start to evaluate that, just buyer beware, I would say. But it can be another way into entrepreneurship, which I'll talk about a little bit. But so for Nature's Bakery, I was really intrigued, and I was trying to see. I saw a couple people from the company pop on. I see one before, so I won't be able to make stuff up. They'll keep me honest. But what was really neat about Nature's Bakery is, I hope I don't get in trouble for use of certain words, but you had this really great product with a really shitty brand. Excuse my language. So they built a really good but simple business on fantastic product and I think a fantastic insight. But they grew up really as bakers, and as manufacturers, not brand builders. So you had this big unlock potential. You had this big unlock potential behind it if we are ready enough. But that was still wide open. So the beauty of it is you already had a good product. You already had actually a pretty loyal following of people through trial. But if you asked them about the product, we were Fig Bar. We weren't Nature's Bakery. It was more like a store brand in terms of a lot of the perception behind it. And so it was really a unique opportunity where we already had manufacturing, you already had this kind of base of business, but a huge opportunity to really clarify purpose, what the company was really about, why we were there, taking that across kind of how we did business, and then communicating it, because we weren't telling our consumers about really a lot of the things that were most important. And so was fortunate enough to have a chance to come in. So we had a whole leadership come in with private equity into the business at that point, really focused on how do we build it. And so we had at least the clarity, as you would with private equity coming in, that there is the intent to exit. So we knew we were building something, we were trying to create value, that at some point in some way there would be a transaction behind. And we knew we all had a level of ownership with that and skin in the game. And so the first thing we really set back is, one, how do we, and personally, how do we make sure that we have the right things in place to be a food company? And so what I mean by that is you have moral and legal obligations, right? That your quality is what it should be, right? You have something that's going out to families and kids. And so there's a level of obligation there. You have to make sure that things are buttoned up. And then from a business perspective, that you're protecting your ante, right? That you don't have undue risk for yourselves or for investors. But then we really just had to figure out who we were. And so that's one thing I've seen in a lot of different businesses, large or small, is you can get a lack of clarity in what you're pursuing, where anything is where anything is worth pursuing if it makes you some money, right? So at that point, the business was pursuing some private label items, other kind of non-branded things. Any kind of point of sale, we could drive some additional dollars in. And I've seen that in a lot of other businesses, and I've seen in a lot of family ones as you guys interact with those, even as they start to mature, it can be kind of treated as a piggy bank, right? So you end up under investing in the business because people are trying to manage it as almost like a tax game, right? Of how do I show no profit because I kind of put all my expenses through it. So you can underinvest there, but you can also end up chasing short-sighted things that don't really give you long-term value. And so we very consciously, the first year, we walked away from some businesses, and it was some really hard internal conversations to be able to do that, because they didn't drive clarity of purpose. They might have had profit, but really not long-term value as we think and thought about how do we really build a brand. And so they might have filled with some capacity and made the P&L look better, but they were just a distraction. And so where we really came back and defined our DNA more, there was, I think, a great insight that the owner had from the start, and I still believe in it. And I think it was, I think if anybody told you in 2012 we need more bars in the grocery store or the convenience store, you would have said they're crazy, right? But the insight that he had was better for you wasn't accessible. Better for you meant expensive, right? It meant Whole Foods. And so if you were a mom that wanted to put something in your kid's lunch that wasn't junk, you didn't have a lot of options unless you were spending, you know, $2 on a Kind bar or something like that. And I won't disparage Kind Bar; they're now our partner, and they're a really good product. I use them all the time, and they've got the right space, but it's not a kid's product, right? And it's too expensive for the average mom from, you know, Sacramento to Scranton to put in the kid's lunch, mom or dad. They're a lot. That might be the total amount someone could spend on the whole lunch. And so being able to make something that was clean label, you know, could be, and I'll talk more about other parts of accessibility, but had a clean label and was affordable, was part, but then it has to taste good or it doesn't matter, right? And so they made a product that, they were bakers, they made a product that tasted really good. They made a product that was an affordable price point. And so it grew off of that. It hadn't grown yet off of the brand unlock and how we communicated that message. But I'll pause again for a second, and then I'll talk about how we pivoted from there.
Thomas, out of curiosity, how were you like listening to the customer? Like you were able to kind of identify like, oh, you know, mothers are looking for this or parents are looking for that. Like I'm curious how you kind of like listen for that.
I mean, research. So there's a lot of different ways to get insights. So our brand team did a lot of different work on in many areas. So for a business of our size, our ability to go out and advertise, you know, in a way you would see in copy or media and things like that is very, very minimal. So, you know, the pack itself, you know, the product itself is by far the biggest way we could communicate with folks. So one of many areas we looked at was what is that package conveying? You know, can you find it? You know, what matters? So you can do research, and you can do it, you know, poor man's version of this too. You can get a group together and say, you know, what is important for you on pack? You've got to be very careful, you know, that the data is relevant, you know, and significant, and you're actually talking to your consumer, which is another, I would say, big risk. And it was a challenge area for this business too, that are the people making those decisions making it from their view and their vision, and are they the consumer, right? I'm not the shopper for most of the things we buy. I'm not the target consumer as much as someone else may be, so being wary of that. But in short, I mean, it was empirical research on some of that. And so when we put the packaging in front of people, and I saw Alice is on from one of that, but they would ask different questions like, what does this package evoke? You know, what does it make you think? And the one soundbite that was pretty funny from that is the one quote used from that is they said an UGG boot. It's like comfortable, it's kind of blah, you know, we like it, it's comfortable, but it was not. We love it. I want to go buy it. It evokes, you know, clean. It evokes wholesome. It's comfortable. So it clearly was not telling the story that we wanted to tell to the people we wanted to reach. So what we had to step back first is before you can get to the packaging side of who are we, what are we about, you know, what is the core win for us? And so one was that value proposition, right? We weren't trying to necessarily be cheap, but we weren't going to launch something and come and drive another product line that was $3 a bar. we wanted to be under 50 cents a bar. So that was really important to our DNA. Like that was the person we wanted to reach that could be the transition from a Nutri-Grain bar, these, labels you need a science degree to understand half of, to, some of these cleaner products. We also weren't going to be, a high performance bar. We weren't going to be, a Quest bar or something like that. That's also very expensive, but a very limited use. So we weren't going to be the thing that dad or mom goes to when they go on keto for a month. We were going to be what they come back to once they give up keto and the whole rest of the family is eating the rest of the time. And so it started to shape and really help us coalesce, like, what were we about? And so that we went back and actually reformulated a lot of our products to make sure that they were cleaner, to make sure that those claims on package could be substantiated. So there's things like being soft baked. We said it's in our name, it's in our DNA. That's going to stay kind of how we within guardrails. Being vegan. So that's helped us kind of expand how we think about accessibility. So accessibility was still mostly about price at the start. We wanted that to be more than about price. We wanted to make sure that that influenced taste, right? So as we think of innovation, whole family appeal versus just, let's say, an adult. We wanted something that the whole family would be comfortable eating. Again, parents feel good about, feeding to their kids. And then things like claims. So, having nut-free facilities. So it is more accessible, right? So whole family canner folks could bring it to school. So it really started to shape a lot of our focus, and then how we would communicate, back to consumers. And then once we knew enough of what things were important, all of that came into the big kind of rebranding efforts that we did in 2018. And so I can't give a lot of specific numbers, but I'd say roughly from that 2016 timeframe to into this year, we grew the business by about $90 million. So almost doubled the business, really through cleaner products, cleaner communication, and just being more focused. And we were really fortunate that the part we didn't mess up the taste of the product. So that was a big part. We were very focused on innovation. So some companies will do a lot more of it, a lot more items. You see them go across all kinds of categories. We really focused in on making sure we had fewer items, but they really won, that we had a high level of confidence that they would do well, and that we'd support them beyond the launch. And so as we came into COVID, and everybody's sick of talking about COVID, so I will be very light on this topic. Packaged food companies took off, right? Remember, the grocery stores were empty. And so where we ended up very fortunate in that is, we still have pretty low market penetration, 5%, call it. So, people who tried our product tended to continue to buy it, but a lot had never tried it. And so we had all kinds of other people that ended up trying the product. We had gotten all the branding right. We'd gotten some other really good products out, beyond Fig, which is still, a lot of people were getting introduced to Fig by our product. It's not that big on the American palate. And so with COVID, we had a lot of other people try. And so we just kept growing. So you see a lot of companies have these huge spikes, and then it dropped off and normalized. And some stayed low, because they may have now be, something people consume at a gym or something like that, and they're not going. But we had so much trial, we've grown like crazy ever since then. So if we looked at our last 12 weeks, so comparing to last year coming out of COVID, we're at 50%. And so we've stayed the largest growing, snack bar in the US for several months, since then, which has been a challenge in itself during COVID, but the business is doing really, really well. So I'm gonna pause on kind of the business and brand story, and then let you guys ask any questions you have. And then I want to talk a little bit about the sale process that I think you guys may find interesting, and things we've learned through that.
I have a question, because it's just so funny you were mentioning the products and they're clean and vegan and all of that. I was just watching a show yesterday with my husband called Game Changer. And I learned that they did some research on some old gladiators. They on some of their bones and stuff, that they were vegan. The majority of them were vegan. as well as the current strongest man in the world, he's also vegan. And the point is that you can get your protein through plant-based things as well, not just meat. So I just found that interesting. Sorry, got thrown off a little bit. I was just like, oh.
No problem, no problem. And
Yeah.
that's part of just the accessibility, thing for us. I think I would die if I was vegan, but God bless them. I'm happy to make products with it.
It was kind of interesting to know, because you always hear of like, you need your meats, all these muscle bound people eat a gang of meat and stuff. And it's like, it's really not necessary. It could, yeah. So anyway.
So,
very
Sarah,
interesting
Christy,
story.
did you want to take a break or just to stop for questions?
Yeah, so let me just check with everyone. Do you think it's a good time to break for 5 minutes? And then when we come back, we'll open it up for our Ask Thomas Any Question? All right, sounds good. Okay, so why don't we come back at 10:55? Give you about 7 minutes. Cool, all right, thank you. I'm gonna
Great, thanks.
pause again. All right, so welcome back, everyone. We are here with our Innovator in Action speaker, Thomas Gentle. I guess for the second part, we'll let Thomas continue his story, and then we'll reserve some time for questions.
Okay, sure. And I'll wrap this story pretty quickly here, and then we can just talk more openly, hopefully. So for us, we had an outside investor. They had a timeline, of course. The family had a timeline, and so we decided to go into the sale process. Started to prepare for that, I would say late 19, and then went onto the market in early 2020. And so a lot of different parts that come with that, everything from selecting a bank and all the different work that goes through that. But one of the first things you do once there is a level of interest that's established that you would actually start to share information outside, is you do a management presentation. So that would be key leaders of the company talking about the business, why it's a valuable asset, why they want it, with companies that be reasonable suitors for that. So our first ones were scheduled March of 2020. How good was that timing? Not so good. Not so good. So we ended up doing all this work, and the level of preparation for it is staggering, especially when you're trying to build a business at the same time and grow it at the same time. And COVID hit, so we ended up pulling the emergency brake right before that first week because everybody freaked out. Right? So as you can imagine, the kinds of companies that would buy a food company are usually other food companies, and so their volume is going crazy. People aren't coming to work. They're trying to find masks, everything that kind of blows up. And so if we had sold at that point, it would have been a fire sale, right? So the whole kind of mentality of all that whole industry, the venture turned vulture, really fast through there. And so we had stopped and pulled back and just stayed and went back to growth mode. And then we actually came back into it this past summer. And so definitely a unique process. There's no way I could describe it not having gone through it. But we're able to meet with a bunch of great businesses, be able to tell our story, and I think ended up with a really great partner. So we were purchased by Mars at the end of last year. So I think Skittles, my all-time favorite food, also vegan, so it's good for you. And so we were purchased, and Kind Bar was purchased one day apart. So we're anchoring a healthy snacking group for them. And so I'd used them a point of comparison before, not by accident, because I think if you think of going into market and selling into a category, we represent kind of two important and two growing portions of it. Because if I go through the airport or something, and I want to grab a snack, I want to get something that's not junk. And I know if I buy a Kind Bar, right? Number one ingredients, almonds. It's going to be transparent. It's going to be something good. But I know I'm going to pay, a lot for that. So they have a different consumer too. They're mostly adult, right? So you see some level of overlap between the two, but we end up capturing a different portion of, of the market than they do. So they purchase these two different brands that can, you'd be selling into the same people, like from the retailer standpoint, but have two different, reasons for being two different markets and, and consumers in some way. And so we're both anchoring, and that's about as far as I can go into that portion of the conversation, but anchoring what they're looking at is how do they, build a robust portfolio. And for those familiar with them, they actually, this family company still, but fascinating company. And they actually employ more veterinarians than anyone else in the whole US, because they have pet hospitals and pet food and other things like that in one area. So they're very much in it for the long haul as a public company, invest in their businesses, but also want kind of breadth and stability to counter things like candy and things like that. So we've spent the last 6 months now working through how do we best partner, how do we best integrate and work across the new platform and also with that company. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop there, and then I'd love to just open it up for questions, and I'm happy to talk about experiences or learnings or mistakes and all of the above along the way.
How did you guys end up dealing with the transition from in-person to virtual?
Well, in a couple of different ways. So on the sales side, so these management presentations would usually be going and sitting in a big conference room somewhere with 20 other people and getting torn apart. It was all virtual, so that was wild. So early on too, I think the outside investors were so nervous about it. They were we were buying lighting, they're having coaches come in and do things. Our CFO, we teased him constantly about it, but he's a little shiny on top, so they're having him dust up the top so his head didn't shine. Like it was really funny, and he will never live that down. So a lot of kind of preparation to be able to kind of connect in that way. From a company standpoint, we're a manufacturer, so going through COVID, the vast majority of my team, 600 people almost, there was no such thing as virtual. We were having to do it in person. We were having to have people be able to come to work and be able to be safe through that. And then offices, probably not so much different than everybody else. Just start to figure out Teams and Zoom really quickly.
Are you guys going back to the office, the ones that were on Zoom, or are you guys going to continue to work from home? Curious.
I think it'll be a mix, really. The most kind of operating centric ones have been back for a long time and will be. I think at our other offices, it's a blend. I think if you talk to the folks on our customer service team, I think half of them would quit if you said y'all have to come back tomorrow. So, and then for a lot of the folks, so we have a Pasadena office, we have a Reno office, and then we have the operating sites. For the Pasadena office, it's a great location. It's a really nice area, but LA traffic is miserable, right? So some folks that are getting an hour and a half back in the morning and at night. So the short answer is I don't think we'll ever go back exactly the same way. But there's a value in being able to be together and look each other in the eye. And so I think we'll find some level of blend for most of it.
I had a question about that branding effort that you guys went through. I've seen your products and just even Googling it online. Something that jumps out to me is that when you look at it, the first thing you think of is not that it's vegan. Can you talk a little bit about why you guys chose to maybe not go all in on the fact that it's vegan? Because you do see some products, right, that are bright green and have veggies all over them. But how you kind of decided to not do that and more lean to a generic base.
I would think of it first as if the anchors are whole family appeal. Most people aren't buying it because it's vegan for their children, for example. And most actually, people aren't buying that as the primary reason. it's one of the other kind of halos of a health benefit behind it that it allows for some more inclusion behind it. The people that are buying just for vegan, they do a lot of research, right? They know, and they're figuring out what restaurants they can go to, what products they can eat, and other things like that. So it being a smaller logo on front or back of pack doesn't mean those folks won't find it. But you actually could even have the opposite effect if your first thing is out there vegan. A lot of our consumers just aren't buying it for that. It's just another benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing for some of us. Like we're doing a certification type thing, and that might be good for us to consider. Is like the people who are going to be particular are going to be doing their own research. So maybe your base is broader that you're trying to brand towards.
And things like non-GMO and other ones like that, some people will search for specifically. Others, it just sounds nice. It's something else that gives it this halo. Like gluten-free, so we have a whole gluten-free line. I think only a fraction of the consumers are actually gluten intolerant, but there's a health halo behind it. So I think figure out who your consumer is and who you want to sell to most. And I think you're spot on. Some are going to research and find their way there if they have a really more kind of niche need.
Thank you.
But I'm not a marketer. I can just try to translate the language. So
Disclaimer.
I do my best.
I actually kind of really like the fact that, it wasn't like in your face, bam, it's a vegan product, right? Because as somebody who's not vegan, as funny as it may be, and I don't know if anybody else is like this, but if I see something that's like predominantly vegan, I'm like, oh, that's not for me. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to go find something that, is going to be tastier, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to bring it home and your kids to not eat it, right? I mean, we've got some bars in our pantry that have been there forever, and it's not because they didn't have a nice package or look good or anything else or why we bought it. Had the first one and it tastes like a dog biscuit and you're done, right? So it has to taste good. So in the food space, it just doesn't matter if it doesn't taste good.
Love it.
I see you sell a lot of bars directly to the customer online. I'm just curious, what is the percentage of the sales versus what you sell through the stores, through the retailers? And I'm curious, I'm assuming it's the same price policy, right?
So let me touch on a couple different parts of it. So for a traditional business like this that's selling a lot through retail, now some was different in kind of the heat of COVID. We use our website as education as much as anything, and we don't necessarily care where they go to buy. So if they go through our website and they follow a link to Amazon or they follow a link to Target because that's where they like to shop, God bless them. If it turns into a sale, it's great. So it's an educating vehicle for us more than anything. We definitely do sell through the website. There's a decent amount of people that'll engage that way. A lot of them it'll be because they like this particular flavor that maybe they're in an area that's a little trickier to find. They love cherry crumble. I'm a sucker for cherries, and I love that one, and it's less widely distributed. So some it'll be niche, lots education, but for us, our main model is going to be through retail, and then we sell substantially more through like an Amazon than we do our own website.
I mean, having a free shipping, I'm loyal to the brands I like, so I would always buy directly from a manufacturer, just buy the big box, but not many people are like that. So I like it.
Depends on, I think, how much folks consume, but we'll sell. So we're in Costco and like Sam's, and so that's one of the ways we grew scale. We grew the opposite way of a lot of companies. They'll go small, they'll get trial and convenience and single bar purchase, and then it might go to a larger pack, and then it'll go to a Costco. Ours was almost the reverse. So it was an interesting growth trajectory because we got fairly big early, but we were simple. And then the complexity just exploded. And that's really where a lot of the other systems and talent and other things like that had to come behind it to support it.
I got a quick question.
Sure.
Because, and I'm going to put it in context, but I'm gonna try to keep it succinct. I'm particularly interested in your approach, because it seems like an entrepreneurial approach, right? Like you're hired to come in to take kind of an executive role, if I'm not mistaken, right? A somewhat executive role to come in and kind of shift the culture to help, change the brand. And just, it's very similar to something that we're going through, that Carla and I are going through with Safety Center. And so I'm curious as to how your executive leadership that was already there, how you managed helping shift their culture, as well as how the people in maybe subservient roles, for lack of a better term, right? In the how the people below you shifted, and how you were able to manage shifting that culture, and what kind of resistance you came up against,
Yeah, definitely, meaty questions there for sure. I'll touch on one part of just, figuring out where you fit, right? So, you learn yourself better over time. Hopefully you kind of learn when to trust yourself and when to kind of know maybe not to trust yourself, if that makes sense. When to, I'll swear again. I'll apologize in advance, but it was actually, this is SEA advice, direct SEA advice I got, so I earn a pass. But we had one of our mentors, his name was Tom Elrod, and he was fantastic. He was the executive director at the time, and we were doing really well on our team, and we were giving a presentation, and he leaned over, I'll never forget it, and with a little, grin on his face, like I have most of the time, and said, if they believe it, just don't believe your own bullshit. And it always stuck with me in various ways. Of one, don't think you're better than you are, recognize what you are, and be wary when you're kind of tricking yourself. So it's really easy to get in your own head, and it could be with your spouse or your partner. It could be, usually it's when you're upset or excited about something, or it could be at work. Step back, take a deep breath, and try to take an outside view of it, because a lot of times you might just be believing your own bullshit. So that one always stuck with me. But part of knowing yourself is also knowing where you fit in. So I am not a pure risk it all entrepreneur. I'm not. I've admired that. I admire the people that are. I could not do what the founder of Nature's Bakery did, which is, go into this industry at that time and bet it all, and caught a tiger by the tail. But what I also learned over time is that same person couldn't do what I did. I mean, it wouldn't exist without him. We couldn't have stabilized it and grown it and commanded the kind of multiple we did by kind of de-risking it and creating this value without someone with my background. And so I think you can find different places. And then if I went one more level, I'm also probably not the person to take it from an A- to an A+. By the time we get it from a messy, C or D to a B+ or an A-, I start to get bored. I mean, I really like the big change. I like to create and build a team and drive that kind of change. I'm not as good at the end because I don't have as much passion for it. So I think, and I'm not judging any part of that. I wish I was better at the end part. I wish I was better at the start of it, but I think you can come into this different ways, so if you come in working for a big company or something like that, without that experience and background, I couldn't have taken it and reapplied it to the smaller. Some people would never want the ambiguity of going and doing what I did. They'd be much happier in that environment. But everybody has their own circumstances. Everybody has their own skill sets. And so I think you guys can figure out, even if you're not the pure risk it all engineer, or even if you wanted to go get more experiences, I think that there's a lot of different ways in. So probably long-winded way of answering the smallest part of your question, but I think it's one, as you guys are all kind of just different transitions in your life to think about. The change management side you hit at is different based on different organizations. So we came in, with a mandate. We came in, with really almost a whole new leadership team. But we did have an existing business and a lot of change to drive. But for me, I'd take more of a kind of do unto others approach, and really wanted to make sure we understood what that business case was first and who we are. I mean, all the components I was talking about from a brand standpoint really drove how we built the team and how we focused the team, and kind of all the tactics just emanated from that. So I think getting the right people on board and getting the right kind of goals and structure for the people that already were there. I mean, some of our absolute best people are not people we added. There were people that were there from day one, but they needed to go to a very different phase of business and kind of way of working at a $200 million company, or as we work towards that, than at a $10 million one. But you know, when I came, we were $100 million and managed from Excel. I mean, we didn't even have an ERP tool or anything. So like the talents in one side can be really different. So some people will make that journey well if they're led well and supported, and others won't. And so, you know, you've got to be able to try to figure that out and recognize it pretty quickly. Existing mature group, we could spend a whole another amount of time on that, but I'd probably, you know, share more of my like nature made experiences there than I would on the more entrepreneurial ones.
That was awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, Thomas, you've done so much in your career. I'm kind of curious, like when you're asked like, oh, what's your next goal? Is it like, I don't even know, like I struggle when someone asks me like, what's your 5-year plan or something like that. I honestly strongly disagree with it. I believe it's good to have great goals, because, you know, your plan tomorrow, your plans for tomorrow, or your plans in 5 years can change tomorrow. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you set your goals?
Good question. Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's been as conscious over time. You know, I think when I was younger, you know, and in big company, it was, you know, next title or something like that. I gave that up a while ago. It started just to become about what I like to do. I mean, I shared, you know, wanting more skin in the game, wanting to be able to exact greater change. And I think as long as those things are in play and I'm having fun, then I'll keep doing it. So I don't have a stated goal of, you know, a company that's twice as big, or you know, or something like that. I've got you know, the good fortune now after the sale of being able to be, you know, choiceful and kind of more comfortable. But for right now, I think as long as I'm adding value, it's a good team, I'm liking what I'm doing, then I'll do that. I'm a board member now for another company, and so that was one way for me to continue to, you know, scratch the itch around, you know, the creation phase and kind of the big change phase at a way where I'm not in running the operation, you know, or something like that, but I can, you know, and work in ways and kind of take our learnings and how they hire and how they approach and how they kind of focus in on their branding and just clarity of purpose in those things. And so right now, if I was to be a betting man, I like what I'm doing. I like the Mars team. You know, I like what we're building, and I think I'll continue to participate in outside board type things so I can help others in kind of more acute and surgical ways versus full time.
Thanks, Thomas.
Oh, you're welcome.
Folks can continue to just unmute themselves, but you're also welcome to use the chat and I can field those for you, Thomas. Any other questions out there?
You know, Thomas, out of curiosity, how did you kind of bridge that transition from, like, you know, an ops guy to now you suddenly just made the jump to like the corporate jump? Like, that itself is also unique.
Yeah, not well. It was painful. That was probably the most painful one. There's several things I didn't appreciate, and I don't mean I didn't like. I mean, I didn't have enough of an appreciation of or understanding of that made it painful. You know, the other thing is just I was young, and so, you know, you've got to appreciate that there's still the way people are going to filter you, right? Humans are conditioned to stereotype by nature. I mean, we're made that way, right? The caveman that was going to knock your head in, it's pretty good if you can recognize which one that is quickly and learn how to run. And I think there's just all these aspects of human condition to where that comes in. And so, you know, young and coming right out of a plant in the corporate environment, people have you pegged, right? So you've got to earn your way out of that. You don't get any kind of automatic credibility. But I think the biggest thing that was difficult for me coming in was there is a kind of clarity of role and expectation and even work ethic, if that's fair to call it that way, in a manufacturing environment, that it doesn't matter if it's the quality person or the HR person or whoever it is that's in that environment. You all know what your job is. You all know what the other people are doing. You know, the big initiative everybody knows about. So you tend to move together and be pretty tight, even if you disagree. And it really stands out if you're the person that comes in at 10 and leaves at 3, right? That doesn't last very long in a manufacturing environment. You get to a corporate world and it's totally different. And I just didn't appreciate that, especially coming into big projects and things like that. I really had to spend a lot more time aligning folks and talking about, you know, you couldn't just start a meeting and dive into something. It's why are we here? What are we about? What are the goals? And all of this other, you know, alignment and like other layers and other departments, which I just didn't have to do a lot of in a plant, even in a lower role. And then you can forget how much positional authority you have, like as a plant manager or something like that. You think that, you know, they're just listening because you have a good idea. It might be half just because your role. So I really struggled early on, and it took a while to figure out how to navigate the organization well enough and drive change, because you just had a lot of different motivations and a lot of different, you know, paths folks were on. You know, an R&D group would have very specific goals, a brand group would have very specific goals, a procurement group would, and a lot of times they didn't overlap and not enough. So figuring out how to bring those together too can make the whole company go a lot faster. So it's one of the things in a smaller company, you can start to figure out where the mismatches are. But it was rough. It took a while.
I can imagine.
We've got one from the chat, and they're asking about your core values. What core values have guided your journey?
Well, I think it just starts with don't be a jerk and give people respect. Yeah, growing up, I think the way I grew up, you know, in Nebraska, my dad worked for the railroad. My mom was the secretary at the church, you know, we went to, and was a teacher, and there was an expectation of work. There was an expectation of how you treated folks. And I think coming through just growing up that way, also just the kind of work I did. And then we did a lot of work on kind of Toyota methods, you know, when I was kind of early in the manufacturing side, and really drank from the fire hose and became a believer in that. And it was really all based on supporting, you know, in our role as servants to the rest of the group versus the other way around. And I really embraced that side. And I love it. It's some of the most fun. So I'll have as much fun on, you know, third shift kind of continuous improvement thing as I do in any board meeting. So I start everything at a point of respect, or try to, and then hope to teach and bring folks along if I can. And it doesn't mean we don't have hard conversations and butt heads, and, you know, you got to make leadership decisions that may not be popular. But I think if you start at a point of respect and trust, then you can go a lot farther than anything else. And it goes for a consumer too. I mean, you just have to take the high road. I mean, we've thrown away hundreds of thousands of dollars of product, you know, but as soon as you start to say, well, it's a little burnt, you know, we're going to have bad metrics this week, but we need to get it out. You know, you have to appreciate everybody else starts to make those same judgments. And if everybody else in your organization starts to think it's okay to be a little bit outside of that, it all comes through to the consumer, and it's going to come back at you. So those are a few that come to mind.
That's great. Thank you, Thomas. One more from chat. What are some of the tips and tricks for dealing with the politics and personal agendas when trying to perform change management? That's a big
Good
question.
question. Good question. Yeah, in the smaller companies, the way it's been described to me, and I largely agree, is it ends up more about personalities than politics. And as I've kind of thought about it more over time, I think there's probably more of it that was also personalities, even the big environment, than politics. So I think if you can get through that and understand the people, it helps a lot. But I'm just coming back into big organization again. So call me in 6 months and I'll let you know. Gonna have to relearn some things.
One more from chat. How do you determine the balance between too few flavors of the core product and too many? For example, I don't see mango anymore.
Oh, first of all, mango is gross, but it is a tough one. So early, there really wasn't much discipline. So you still need to be able to start with consumer first and market. So there's a million flavors that would be interesting for us to launch. It's easy for us to go to a bakery in Santa Monica and say this, blueberry fig with sprinkles and patchouli oil and matcha flavor would be fantastic, but it's not our consumer. It's too much. It's overdone. But you do need to have a level of variety. So we can't just be blueberry and raspberry to everyone. But as you start to look at space and market, you only get so much real estate too. They're not going to give you 20 spots just because you want 20 spots. They have to work hard for you. And so you can look at some, like in a retail environment, you can look at transferability of demand and say, you know what, a blueberry versus a raspberry are two different things, right? People are wanting two different things. But if I have a raspberry and a strawberry, and one of them's not on the shelf that day, are they just going to move between those? They may and may not. So you want to have enough things that you can have variety. But if things start to get so similar or so niche, you can't maybe fulfill the promise. So for us, if we're going to be inexpensive, we do have to make enough of it, right, to be able to make money. It can't be too tiny, or we can't do it at the kind of price points that allow that accessibility we want and still make a profit. And so there's some, mistakes we've made in the past where they'd come out and launched, I think, four or five brownie items at the exact same time.
Oh, geez.
And so you had every retailer pick the one they wanted. And so instead of having one good brownie, we had 3 or 4 small ones, none of which they could do well in their own right. So I would say there's a level of discipline you can apply to it as you think about what kind of retailer feedback you can get or market feedback. And then the other thing, you just need to look at your business model and say, can I support really small and niche or not? And a lot of that's just going to depend on price point and how you make it.
Let's see, one more from chat. Do you ever have so much on your plate that you have to pick your daily fail? If so, how do you prioritize what needs to get done? It's a great one.
I think I have 1,000 unopened emails. So I will fail at that. That'll be my first fail every time. If you talk about knowing ourselves, I constantly take on more than I can do, because if I see another area that needs help or needs attention or something, I just hop into it, and sometimes that can dilute me across the rest of it. So I don't know that I'm the best to give advice there. I try to make sure, especially in a role like mine, that your people aren't waiting for you. I think that's the most dangerous part, that if you're not putting enough attention into hiring well, or you're so focused on all the stuff you're trying to get done as an individual that you've got 7 other leaders sitting and waiting on you, that's the biggest cardinal sin. So I just suggest anybody getting into a leadership role at any level, look first at making sure your folks have the tools they need, have the direction they need in those things, and then fill in the rest, or really fight to create the time to give them that clarity.
Other questions? Actually, I have a question about geography. It seems like you've done a lot of moving around for the various companies and roles. Was that ever challenging? Did you have, I mean, you were moving your family with you. How did that work for you?
It was tough. I'm glad I did it. So it's easy to get so tied to an area that you're unwilling to, and you can miss some opportunities. I'm sure my career grew more when I was younger, just for the willingness to go anywhere and do anything. My wife's job was an audit, so she was all travel, so it was a different airport for her. So that made that easy early, and when kids were little, it was early. But when I made the hop from ConAgra over, that's when my daughter was getting into kindergarten, and so we really have only moved once, since then. So we've been able to really kind of slow that side down. I've also just figured more over time, it's less disruptive to everybody to just get on a plane, so I fly more than I want to, but then at least, my dog knows which yard this is. But I think for folks, while you can be mobile, I know it's hard. Don't miss out on it, because you learn so much, not just from the job opportunities, but just the cultures in the different areas. It's been fun. There's places I definitely wouldn't live again. They can have South Georgia. That's not me. But a place like Baltimore I loved, and some of these other areas, and we've just got a lot of friends, from these different spots. The other thing though is, I think we've owned 10 houses. That would be a piece of advice that got beat into us so much growing up, of buy a house, buy a house, buy a house. If this could be like the second house I ever owned, that would have been great. We spent more time trying to fix them or sell them or take care of them and all these different things, that I would have taken all that time in life back, instead of screwing around with houses. But make your own choices there, but there's not only one right way.
I loved how you said Missouri too, because that means you live there. My dad lives there also.
Oh yeah,
He's
my
local.
grandparents both grew up on.
Okay, all right.
I caught that as well as a giveaway.
Yeah.
Missouri. My wife called it misery.
Wow.
More clear pronunciation.
Where are you based now, Thomas?
I'm in Reno. So our headquarters is here, and so we were in LA. But love the mountains, love the accessibility to outside. We still have a lot of our friends are in Bay Area along there, and it's close. And so we ran away up here a year ago and just kind of reset a different home base. So love it. Now I can complain about all the other Californians coming over now that I've Nevada plates and got rid of my California ones.
So Canadians and Californians.
Hey, everybody. Nobody's safe.
I'll ask the inevitable question, which is, if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself, knowing what you know now?
I mean, the house thing would be there. I think
Okay.
they learn from all the different experiences. So there's some of them that wouldn't necessarily love to go do again. Some were hard to there, but I liked them. I think not. I didn't just chase the next opportunity, even if it may have seemed that way. I mean, I was with the same company for 10 years and then the same company was 6 years. And I think if I had just been more kind of chasing just the next title, or, trying to make a few $1,000s more, I don't know that I would have learned and gained as much, and built the kind of relationships that ended up a lot more valuable later. So I would just say I didn't always do it, but I advise anybody, just play the long game. Life's short in some ways, but it's long in others, and you can chase the right now so much that you miss other bigger opportunities later. I don't regret being a third shift warehouse clerk. That was the way in the door. We hire a lot now, and I'll talk to folks out of school, and they want to be an engineer and only an engineer, and they have no experience doing any of it. They'd never do shift work. They'd never dare be a supervisor. They won't. And I don't mean this broad brush, but a lot of folks they won't just get in there and kind of grind through some of these difficult experiences. They kind of think they're above it when they haven't done parts of it. I mean, don't think yourself above anything. But that and not buying houses.
Okay.
That's took away half
Grant
my brain.
Grant Cardone says, buy where you travel and rent where you live.
Oh, okay.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, I think the other thing probably for my 20s is I don't think I ever needed more than a third drink, and a lot of times we ordered a lot more than that. So you don't need to order anything a double. You don't need anything past a third is probably not helping you anyway.
It's good advice.
I don't want to have to use your other traffic services for the DUI. So I would advise everyone keep yourself in check.
I just have a comment about the Missouri thing.
Yeah.
And that is that my dad was born and raised in Missouri, and I never heard him say that. I always
really?
heard Missouri.
Oh,
But
yeah.
then I was in a children's theater program in Southern California, which is where I was born, out of LA. And I remember him taking me home after rehearsal one time, and he said, "Are you from Missouri?" And I went, "No." Pause. I'm like 10 or 11 years old. My dad is. He said, "Oh, that's it." I said, "That's what?" He said, "I can hear it." I said,
Okay.
"I was born in Los Angeles." He goes, "Doesn't matter."
It came through. It's a funny place. I mean, it doesn't know if it's north or south yet, right? So you can get very different cultures depending on where you are, in the state too.
Since he covered his town where he was born with a lake, and that's where his birth certificate is, so he could never prove where he was born, and yet he still got into federal government. So go figure.
All right. Any more questions? It was an amazing journey that you shared, Thomas. I'm still like processing all the words of wisdom. Luckily, we recorded this, so we'll make that available, both the first part and the second part. And also, I just want to thank Corey Farron for joining us. It's nice to have someone, I guess, in your network, Thomas, that's part of this session with us. All right, I guess let's give Thomas a big applause, and thank you so much for reconnecting with the Sacramento Entrepreneurship Academy. It's quite special that you're supporting us in this particular year, given that it's our first all virtual program. And I'm really proud how we made this quite a very dynamic program with all the pivots that we did to make this a success. And so I really want to thank the 2021 fellows for being such a trooper, for just being just the most amazing class ever. And I just want to give you guys a big applause as well. Cool. All right.
I really appreciate being able to come. It's neat being on the other end of it. Yeah, there's still folks I talk to regularly, from advisors to people in the class, 20 years later now. So you guys all if you have, my experience, which I hope you do, you'll have some pretty tight, tight friends and people you can reach back to from this. So it's been pretty neat. So thank you guys. And, Christy, you have my information. So if I can be of help to anybody in any way, just please don't be shy.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of SEA. It's such an amazing program that provides a lifetime mentorship and a community that can sustain you throughout your journey. That's what I got out of it, and it sounds like Thomas as well. And thank you, Deanna, for connecting us to your fellow class alum. It's been really nice to kind of reflect back on hearing other people's stories and be able to share that with our current class.
Well, y'all need to just invite your souls over to Jim's house for a barbecue or something, since you haven't seen each other here.
That's right. We're long overdue for an in-person gathering.
You guys don't know if Justice could be 6'5" or 5'6", and nobody knows because you haven't even seen him in person. You guys have to get together.
All right, so I guess we'll just close it out. What happens next? As I mentioned, you have your final presentations next Wednesday, and I know you guys are eagerly, not anxious, but eagerly excited to present your final business plan. I did announce our panel judges. It's really quite an illustrious panel. We have people who are on the investment side, but also have supported other entrepreneurs in different capacity. So I would recommend to check out their bios so that you could kind of understand who you're going to be pitching to in terms of the panel audience. We'll also have board members, alums, and your mentors and other friends of the Academy present. Any questions before we end our session today?
One quick one, Christy. I think it's somewhere in the classroom, but there's it's probably like a scorecard of like what the judges will maybe judging us by.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could quickly pinpoint me where that is.
Yes, yes. I'll share that. It may have been in a prior session, but what I'll do is after this session, I will distribute that. And essentially, you've seen the online form, but I'll share kind of like the detail behind the scores.
Thank you, Christy.
Always for you guys. And again, if you guys have any questions, anything you want to run past me, Lori, or any of the mentors, please do take this opportunity. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday. Dress for success, okay?
Thanks, Christy.
All right. Thank you so much, Thomas, for being our Innovator in Action speaker, for closing out our program. And I will see everyone at the final presentations.
Thank you, Thomas.
And thank you,
Thank you
Deanna,
so
for
much, guys. Take
facilitating
care.
the Q&A.
Of course.
All right. Cheers,
Take care.
everyone.